Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey, it's Jessa. Welcome back to another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. So glad you're here with me. I'm so grateful for you spending a little bit of time with me. I've got a really interesting interview today. Michael Castleman is here, and he is a journalist who's been writing about sex since he was 24, he said, and he is now 70. So a very long career combing the research and learning all about how sex really works and trying to promote that good word in the world. And he has a new book, either just coming out or just came out, depending on when I release this episode, called Sizzling Sex Across the Lifespan. And he's talking about like every single issue about sex he could think of, from birth till death, really, trying to bring research-backed science and information to people. And it's fascinating. So we're going to talk about, the most common problems that people face and the kind of misconceptions people have. And by the end, we're going to get into pornography and the fact that really it doesn't pose any downside except for possibly misinformation and setting up unrealistic expectations, which I talk about all the time. Anyway, he's a wealth of knowledge and a really interesting conversationalist, so hope you enjoy it. And before we start the show today, it is sponsored by Intimacy with Ease. It's a method to help otherwise happy couples achieve a sex life that is easy and fun for both of them, so you can actually just enjoy your sex life with zero stress. For more information, if you want to watch a brief little training video that's available, all of that, go to intimacywithease.com. So, Michael, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
I would love for you to start by just giving me a little background about your long history being a journalist writing about sex. What prompted the interest? Why this focus for you?
Well, I started writing about sexuality 46 years ago in 1974.
Wow.
As a young man of 24. And I was writing for a community newspaper. I was a journalist, and I was writing health articles. And Valentine's Day was coming up, and the editor said, "Mike, we need you to write an article about sex. I want to call it How to Make Love, because we need advertising for Valentine's Day." And I said, I refused. I was 24 years old. What did I know? And he begged, he pleaded. I said, no. And I walked home. And I was living with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. And when I walked in the door, she said to me, "What do you mean you won't write this article about sex? You got to do this. In fact, you might learn something." And it turned out the editor, we were socially friends, and the editor had called my girlfriend and said, "You got to get Mike to write this article for me." So I was cajoled into doing it. And then I did, and I jumped into the field, and I hadn't, I lived with a woman and we were having sex, but it wasn't very well informed. So I wound up reading a whole bunch of books about sexuality and interviewing a bunch of sex experts at the University of Michigan, and I wrote that article. And I thought, this is a great field, and I really liked it, and it clearly could help a lot of people, and it helped me. Because at the time, I had very poor ejaculatory control, like many young men do.
Right.
And in the research I did, reading about Masters and Johnson's cure for it, I went to my girlfriend and I said, "Okay, you wanted me to write this article? Well, I need some help with this, and I want you to help me." And she said, "Okay." And I was cured in a month. I was shocked. I thought, oh my God, I can't be the only one. I mean, men should know about this.
Yeah.
And so I've been writing about sexuality defined broadly for almost 50 years. And premature ejaculation continues to be the best-selling item on my website. I have an e-booklet called The Cure for Premature Ejaculation, which details the Masters and Johnson approach and the many refinements that have been added in the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And it's the best-selling item on my website, and that's how it happened. And I really liked it because I'm a health journalist, and health defined broadly, which includes sexuality.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of the thank you notes I've received over the years have had to do with answering people's sex questions. You answer a question about asthma, diabetes, you never hear from people.
Right.
You answer their sex question, they get back to you and say, thank you so much. And that's really what's kept me in the field. I like the thank you notes.
So you do write about other things at this point? It's just a large segment of your work is about sexuality?
No, at this point, since 2005, for the last 15 years, I've only written about sexuality.
Yeah, okay.
Before that, I wrote about health defined broadly. In fact, I used to specialize a lot in alternative medicine. And I still do write a little bit about herbal medicine because I love herbs and gardening. But in 2005, I decided that the internet was just so full of generic health information that what could I really contribute? Whereas in the sex field, I felt like I had a significant different point of view, and I was writing mostly for men, trying to pound through their thick skulls what women wish they knew. And I thought I would continue that. And so I don't really write much about health anymore. I'm pretty much devoted to sexuality.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me the story of this latest book, because you've written a few. It seems to me there's so much in this. Like, how did you decide to tackle Sizzling Sex? You're talking about sex at any age. Is this just a matter of, I don't know, your own lifespan here that this is another book geared towards?
Well, part of it has to do with the fact that I'm 70 and I've been writing about sex since I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And sex does evolve with the life cycle.
Right.
That was part of it. And part of it was, I've read hundreds of sex books over the years, and they almost all are very rifle shot. Sex information for toddlers, for teens, for young adults, for sex in the elderly, sex for people with disabilities. And I got frustrated with that because I felt, you know what? I mean, sex is this thing that things you do sexually when you're young have implications for later in life. And if you don't consider the entire lifespan, you're missing something. And no one had ever done a book that looked at sexuality throughout the entire lifespan. And I thought, for my last book, this may very well be my last book since I'm getting old. I thought, there's a service I could provide outlining all the sexual issues that people typically face from birth to old age, from the sexual implications of circumcision to the growing phenomenon of sex in nursing homes and everything in between. Plus, I also felt like sex books are usually about sexual enhancement. But there's a downside to sex too. There's child sex abuse, there's sexual assault, there's sexual harassment. And I felt like there should be a book that discusses sex in its entirety, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because a lot of the downside of sex, if it's approached with compassion and patience and understanding, you can recover from these problems. People who have had childhood sex abuse can recover and enjoy excellent sex. People who have been sexually assaulted can recover and enjoy good sex. And I felt like that message, one of global reassurance that, pretty much sex is fun for most people most of the time. And for those who it isn't fun, that can be repaired. And so I wanted to, consider everything, all sexual subjects, the good, the bad, and the ugly, from birth to the grave.
That seems like that would be an encyclopedia set. How did you fit this in one book?
Well, it is rather encyclopedic, and The other thing I should mention is that this book is entirely comes out of the medical literature. I'm not a therapist writing about cases.
Right.
I did the most global analysis of the sexuality research literature that I think has ever been done. I have over 2,500 studies in my book.
Wow.
And it is encyclopedic, and it's kind of a big fat book. It's sort of like a home medical guide of sex. And that was one of the reasons why publishers were a little bit nervous about it. They felt like maybe it's too big. And I had some companies turn it down because they said, nah, this should be 4 books. It shouldn't be 1 book. And I said, no, really, it's a home medical guide of sex. It should be 1 big fat book. And finally, Skyhorse Publishing of New York said, we really like this. We like the unity of it. We like the fact that it's comprehensive. We like your point of view. And so a deal was made.
Yeah. And did you do a lot of new research for this, or is this sort of the culmination of 40 some years, keeping up with the research and writing? You know what I mean?
Well, let me put it this way. I had a big head start on the
right.
research because I had been writing about it for so long, and I had been writing out of the sexological research for, close to 50 years. But whenever I write about something anew, I always research it because there's always new research coming out.
Right.
And this one, I estimated, going into this project, I estimated that it would take 18 months to write this book. But because of all of the research that I had to wade through and digest, it took 3 years.
Yeah.
So it took twice as long as I thought it would. But it produced a better book because my goal was to be really comprehensive. And taking the extra time allowed me to be comprehensive, and I didn't have a book contract. I wrote this book before I tried to sell it.
Right.
So, book contracts come with deadline. There was no deadline, so if I wanted to take another 6 months to investigate the effects of pornography on men, I could do that, and I did.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did.
So what would you say are the biggest misconceptions or the surprises? What do you think the most common surprises would be if somebody were to read the book cover to cover? What do you think the research shows that would be most surprising to people?
Well, I think one thing that is central to this book is the fact that surprisingly few women have orgasms during intercourse. The estimates vary, but it's really no more than 20% max.
Max, right.
And so that means that at least 4 out of 5 women need and want direct clitoral caresses.
Yeah.
And this has been demonstrated in dozens of studies. And yet, an enormous number of men are completely clueless about this. You say sex to men, and what they think of is, jackhammer intercourse that they see in porn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're asking their girlfriends, did you come?
Right.
And the fact is that an enormous proportion of women lie about it.
I was going to say, I've had so many guys in therapy who say, oh, all my other partners have come through intercourse. And I'm thinking, no, they haven't. the numbers don't bear that out, so, right?
I sympathize with women who feel uncomfortable confronting men and saying, listen, you moron, I'm not coming.
Right.
A lot of women simply can't say that. But the downside of that is when they don't, men never learn differently.
Right. Right.
And so I have felt for years that it's my role to take a big sledgehammer, hit men over the head with it, and say, listen, guys, she isn't coming when you're having intercourse with her. Just forget it. That is not happening. So I'd say that's one of the main messages of the book. And then the second message is, why aren't women coming? And that the answer to that is that dozens of studies, many of them by women sex researchers, show that when you say sex to men, they think about intercourse. When you say sex to women, they think about leisurely, playful, whole body massage that, yes, eventually does focus on the genitals, but, 5 or 6 songs from now if you're making love to music. And men rush into intercourse. Mm-hmm. which they think produces orgasm for women. It produces orgasm for 95% of men, but a small percentage of women. And if they want women to come, which is very important to men,
Right.
in the 1960s and 70s, a lot of second generation feminist women, their attitude was men don't care if women have good sex. That is wrong.
Right.
Men judge their own sexual self-esteem based on how much pleasure they can provide. And so when you say to men, look, you can have all the intercourse you want. If you want to last a long time, if you want your penis to work right, if you want to have reliable erections, here's what you do. Don't jump into intercourse. Don't rush it. Get into whole body massage. If she touches every square inch of your body, your dick is going to work a lot better.
Yeah.
And you know what? If you touch every square inch of her body, she's likely to come.
Yeah.
And so there's a sort of unity to this about how it's a win-win. When sex is redefined as whole body massage that eventually focuses on the genitals, everybody wins. Everybody's happy. Men function better with fewer sex problems, and women function better and they come.
Yeah.
So that's my mission. I'm kind of the Johnny Appleseed of direct stimulation. I'm out there spreading my seeds and
right.
hoping that something grows.
It is something I say to almost every couple I meet in therapy, right? That because so many people don't know it. I can't take it for granted that people understand that women need clitoral stimulation, not just intercourse. So
right. And the research orientation of my book, the fact that my book is not, I'm not a therapist telling people, hey, do this. I am saying, look, here's this study. Here's study A, B, C, D, E. The research, the worldwide research on women's orgasms is absolutely incontrovertible. All the studies say the same thing. Very few women come during intercourse, but if women receive direct clitoral massage and caresses by hand, mouth, vibrator, their rates of orgasm are fairly similar to men's. Mm-hmm. And in surveys of women where they say, how do you like to be stimulated? They say, well, whole body massage. I like hand jobs. I'm into fingering if it's lubricated. But mostly I really like cunnilingus. I like oral sex. I like receiving it. And that's how I come.
Yeah.
And so the message to men is what hangs between your legs is very important to you sexually. But
right.
That little guy is not that important to women. What's much more important is your lips and tongue.
Yeah.
Work them and everybody's happy.
Yeah. So would you say difficulty getting to orgasm with a partner is the most common problem for women? That this misunderstanding is really the biggest deal for them?
Well, it is a major problem for women. The biggest problem for couples, the number one sexual issue in long-term couples is desire difference.
Right.
Which is virtually inevitable. I mean, everyone is sexually unique. Our sexuality is as unique as our fingerprints. And people think there is one right way to have sex. Wrong. There's as many ways to have sex as there are people having it.
Right.
And so you take two unique individuals and you put them in bed together, and they are going to have a unique sexual relationship. And that relationship is almost inevitably going to have desire differences after the first 6 months.
Yeah.
And it for many people, as you know, this is a very difficult, festering relationship poisoning issue.
Yeah.
And so I have a whole chapter in my book called "You Never Want to, You're Insatiable: How sex therapists recommend resolving desire differences." Yeah. And on my website, where I sell sex information, after premature ejaculation, that is the number 2 article that I sell the most of, how to overcome desire differences. Because again, there is a sex therapist and other psychotherapists have developed a fairly straightforward way to reach a compromise, mutual accommodation, where nobody gets what they actually want, but everybody gets enough so they can live with it comfortably and continue to be together and wake up smiling in the morning.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly the focus of my work. It shows up all the time, and it's the biggest, it's the most common thing I'm helping people with, for sure. Because it's universal, because why would any two people want exactly the same amount of sex? So
exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And again, the media have completely underplayed this issue. I mean, you read sex information in the mass media on the internet. Very little is about desire differences. Very little, and it's the number one issue. And there was just a survey published last year of several thousand couples, where overwhelmingly their biggest sex problem was desire difference.
So let me ask you this, because I see in my practice, I mean, I think another place media goes wrong, or the perception in the culture is somehow in a heterosexual relationship, it's always the guy that wants more sex and it's always the woman that doesn't, which is not what I see in therapy. So does the research back that up too?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I have, over the last 30 years or so, I've done sort of informal surveys of sex therapists and counselors and psychotherapists, and they overwhelmingly say that 1/3 to 1/2 of cases, the woman wants more sex and the guy is pulling back. And it's funny because there was a movie that came out a couple of years ago called Hope Springs.
Oh, yeah.
A romantic comedy with Meryl Streep and Tommy Lee Jones. A great movie.
Yes.
And they go into sex therapy because she wants to make love and he won't do it.
Right.
And that really, yes, many men have more libido than many women. And so there's a lot of time, there's old jokes about, what's foreplay to a guy who's been married 10 years, an hour of pleading. But despite the humor, an enormous number of relationships, the woman wants more sex. And that's difficult for people because when the man wants more sex, it can cause grave problems in the relationship, but both people kind of think that's what's expected. That's normal. Of course, the guy wants more. He's a guy.
Right.
When the woman wants more sex, they have the sexual desire difference, but they also have a situation that is unexpected culturally.
Right.
And so it makes it more difficult. If she's thinking, oh, what's wrong with me? They're both thinking, what's wrong here? And they don't realize this is totally normal. This happens all the time.
Yeah. Hey everybody, it's Jessa, and we're just taking a little break in the show so I can share something exciting with you. At least I think it's exciting. I wrote a book called Sex Without Stress, and I had turned it into an online course, and now I've reformatted it so that you can sign up at any time. It's more like an a la carte thing. For less than $100, you and your partner can work through this entire process, guided through webinars and assignments and conversations to have and real-world exercises to use to take the stress out of your sex life. So if you're in a good relationship but sex is the issue, this could be a perfect fit. And then separate from that, you can opt into my membership group, month at a time, or you can sign up for a whole year. That's where you'll get the personal support while you're working through the process. So it comes with Q&A sessions, bonus content, some guest presenters, and a private support community, like a forum. So that's priced separately so you can just participate in that when it's useful to you. Anyway, if you want to learn more, go to sexwithoutstress.com. And now back to the show. So what's the number one problem then? That's the number one problem for couples. What's the number one? Well, I'm guessing you're going to say for men, premature ejaculation, since that's your best-selling your best-selling thing there.
The research shows the best publicized men's sex problem is erectile dysfunction, because there's a huge drug industry and advertising that supports it, and the drug companies publish a tremendous amount of information about it, and without for a moment minimizing the importance of that. The fact is that rather few men under around 45 have significant erection problems. But in every post-puberty age group of men, from puberty to the late life, 25 to 30% of men report difficulty with ejaculatory control. And so throughout the lifespan, premature ejaculation is definitely the number one problem. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to consider sexuality throughout the whole lifespan, because it gives you more perspective.
Right.
And that's the big one.
Yeah. And what's the number one problem for women?
Well, orgasm difficulties are the number one. And beyond that, it's inability to get men to do what they would like them to do. Women are frustrated.
Yeah.
And a lot of, women are trained. There are plenty of super assertive women in this world. I am married to one. But in general, women are reluctant to state their sexual needs and desires, particularly young women. Mm-hmm. And this was thrown into stark relief recently because last year, 2 years ago, there was a study from Indiana University asking women about sexual pain. And it turns out that a substantial proportion of women have sexual pain, on the order of 25 to 30%.
Right.
And then they asked the women with sexual pain, do you ever mention it to your partner? Very few ever said anything.
Yeah.
And so you ask men, have you ever had a woman who had sexual pain? The guy says, of course not. No, I've never heard of this, because they've never heard of it.
Yeah.
But sexual pain is very common among women. And again, I'm encouraging women to reveal that, because sexual pain can almost always be alleviated. And the number of women who are, it's surprising how few women are really well informed about possible causes of sexual pain. You say vaginismus to most women, they look at you, what? What's that?
Right.
It's very common.
Yes.
And it's tragic. It just breaks my heart that so many people are in pain. Women don't talk about it unless it's quote unquote severe. Well, even moderate sexual pain interferes with pleasure, interferes with orgasm, interferes with your enthusiasm for having fun with your guy.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I know that I talk to some people who don't realize that it shouldn't hurt. Pain, this is just the way it is, the way it's supposed to be. They have that image, and so they don't mention it because they don't think anything can change, partly,
Right.
Yeah.
And, people lose their virginity. They think that, it's got to hurt the woman. That's like, it's a given. It's going to hurt.
Right.
And it doesn't have to hurt, even the first time.
Right.
I have a chapter in my book called The Virgin's Guide to Happily Losing It, where I go through a lot of advice to virgin women about how to be appropriately assertive and take your time, use lubricant, fairly standard sex advice goes a long way to preventing unhappy virginity loss nights.
Right.
But very few people know it, which is one of the reasons I wrote this book.
Yeah. Does the book cover same-sex sexual relationships too?
Yes, it does. Now, I'd be very clear here that 90% of the American public is exclusively heterosexual. And so the book is basically written for heterosexual couples, but I don't think the majority should tyrannize the minority.
Right.
And I think I've gone out of my way to try to be inclusive of LGBTQ people and transgendered people and asexual people. You could write a sex book, and it's important to say that 1% of the population really doesn't care for sex at all.
Yeah.
And that's their perfect right. And so there's a section on asexuality. Yes, there's a whole chapter on people who are not actively heterosexual. And the other thing is that a lot of sexual issues are independent of one's orientation and one's gender. So, for example, I have a chapter on how to talk to preschoolers, toddlers and preschoolers about sex. Well, straight parents, gay parents, bisexual parents, it's all pretty much the same.
Right.
It's independent of your own preference. The same with a lot of sexual issues. Now, that said, I will also say that for people who are LGBTQ, maybe my book is not the be-all and end-all for them. Maybe they want some other resources, and that's good. That's fine.
Right.
I see my book as an open door, a way to get into the field, to learn what you can, and if you need other resources, they're out there.
Yeah. So you mentioned in the beginning that some of the things we do early in our life might have ramifications later in our life. What are some of the things you might want to highlight about that? Assuming it's not too late for us, or we're raising children or something like that. Like, what are some of the things that people might want to know about what to do early in life for the best outcomes later?
I'm glad you asked that, because the biggest issue that has implications throughout the lifespan is self-sexing, solo sex, what's often called masturbation.
Mm-hmm.
And masturbation is absolutely normal. If you leave kids alone, they are enthusiastic masturbators. Why? Because it feels so good.
Right.
And they only stop masturbating in public when adults scream at them, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So if adults are dismissive of masturbation, if they are punishing, if they are condemning of it, that has deep, deep sexual implications throughout the entire lifespan. If you cannot make love with yourself happily and comfortably, it is very difficult to make love with anybody else happily and comfortably, because you're not comfortable with your own sexuality. And you look at the problem of alleged sex addiction, which is an alleged scourge suffered by millions of men. Basically, sex addiction is a fantasy. It doesn't exist. What exists is men who have been bludgeoned to believe that there's something wrong with masturbation,
mm-hmm.
but they're guys and they keep masturbating their whole life, and they use visual aids, pornography. So they get into their 30s, their 40s, and all of a sudden they think they're sex addicts because 30 or 40 years ago, their parents and clergy told them touching yourself is wrong. So that's what I mean by saying that things that happen early have implications for later in life.
Yeah.
The mission, among sex educators and a lot of sex therapists and psychotherapists, they're bored. They're bored of masturbation. I mean, how many times do you have to say, it's okay, don't worry about it, before you just don't want to talk about it anymore? But the fact is that for the public, for Mr. and Mrs. America out there, solo sex is a huge, ongoing dilemma, problem, and I can't tell you the number of questions I get on my Q&A site that say, I've been masturbating to porn, now I can't get it up. It's masturbating. I'm trying to stop masturbating. How can I do that?
Yeah.
And I say to them, get a clue. Don't stop masturbating. Just understand what's going on.
Right. Well, and it's an issue for couples too, because sometimes a partner will be like, my partner shouldn't be masturbating. They should be, this should just be in our sex life somehow, or they think it's cheating, or, somehow this is a real problem.
Right. Yeah. Yes. Mental infidelity, people call it. If you masturbate, and the other thing, people who, the most common sexual fantasy is doing it with someone else. And so a lot of people feel like if my lover dreams of doing it with someone else, that's wrong.
Yeah.
Stop thinking that.
Right.
Well, that's like asking someone to walk past a shoe store and not look in the window.
Yeah.
I mean, it really, it's so sad, and and all of the misconceptions about sexuality are like a full employment act for sex educators and therapists. This country needs a lot of sex education and therapy, because there's so many religious objections to masturbation and casual sex that everybody does. I mean, you have religious conservatives insisting on virginity until marriage. You know how many Americans are virgins on their wedding night? 3%.
3%. Wow.
97% of Americans have partner sex before their wedding night. 97%. Now, around 20% of the country is evangelical Christian or Catholic, 25% of the country, who believe that's wrong. Well, most of them do it too, even though they think it's wrong. And that causes conflict. That causes psychic upsets that can interfere with lovemaking and the pleasure of sex.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you're talking about, the message of hope in this book, that things are surmountable, right? I mean, part of what I talk to people about is struggles with sex are common and normal, and our bodies change and are fickle, and responsiveness, things happen. There's like a lot that can impact our sexual functioning and how we're feeling. And there's some way to address it with your partner, to create a thriving sex life or whatever the situation is. So
it's people build these walls around sex and think that it's that having a good sex life is like climbing Mount Everest in a blizzard. It's not.
Right.
The body is made to enjoy sex. The evolutionary imperative is to reproduce, and the way evolution has primed us to do that is to give us pleasure while doing it, so we come back and do it again.
Yeah.
And most sex problems can be happily resolved. I mean, I have a chapter in my book on sex and disability, and I'm sure you know, wherever there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah.
You can be quadriplegic and have an enjoyable sex life. You're not going to have the same sex life that you had before you were quadriplegic,
right?
But you can still have fun. And there's a great movie about that too, The Sessions with Helen Hunt, where she's a surrogate partner who helps a guy who's a quadriplegic have as good of a sex life as he can possibly have. And after they're together, he always comes out smiling.
Yeah.
So it works.
Right.
Most sex problems are not that difficult to resolve. And that's why most sex therapy doesn't last more than 4 to 6 months, because it doesn't have to.
Right. It is a pretty short-term, solution-focused approach. So I'd be curious to wrap this up. Like, what did the research say about pornography? Are there any downsides or harmful aspects to this, or, what would you say about that?
Well, shocking as this may sound, pornography is basically benign.
Yeah.
It's a masturbation aid for men. If you
women.
Talk to Anti-Porn Crusade, 25% of the porn audience is female.
Yeah.
And also as a masturbation aid often. If you talk to social and religious conservatives, they say that masturbation causes misogyny, that men who watch porn hate women. There's great research to show that's simply not true. Every man watches porn. How many hate women? Not too many.
Right.
People who are opposed to porn say that it causes sexual assault. Absolutely not. Since porn hit the internet in 1996, and if porn causes sexual assault, then since 96, there should be a lot more rape, right? If there's more porn, there should be more rape. Actually, if you take a look at the best statistics, the Justice Department's National Crime Victim Survey, the rate of sexual assault has dropped 50% since 1996. There's more porn, there's less rape. Guys who are looking at computers and with one hand busy, they're not out raping women. They're masturbating. That's what they're doing. A lot of porn opponents say it causes teen sexual irresponsibility. The teens look at porn against their will. They somehow get sucked into it, and then they're just captured and like a fly in a spider web.
Right, right.
If you look at the actual facts, the teen pregnancy rate peaked in 1991. That was 16 years before. That was 5 years before internet pornography happened.
Yeah.
Since then, since 91, the teen pregnancy rate has fallen 70%, 70. And kids today are having less sex than pre-internet teens had.
Right.
And if they're having sex, they're much more likely to use condoms. So teens aren't more sexually irresponsible, they're sexually responsible. So if you tick down the list of all of the grave social harm that people accuse pornography of causing, it causes none of them, none. So pornography causes two things, and two things only. One is masturbation. The other is sexual miseducation of men and women, because when real people make real love, it doesn't unfold like pornography. Pornography is entirely genitally focused. And as I said earlier, if you want to have good sex, you want to get to the genitals, but after quite a while. You want to have a half hour of other play first. And pornography, boy meets girl, next thing you know, she's on her knees. That's a formula for sex problems. And so that's a problem, but it's not like pornography is out there destroying civilization.
Yeah, somebody recently said, you probably heard this before, it's like learning to drive by watching Fast and Furious, right? It's, porn is to sex, right. That movie is to driving. So the research, the other thing I hear from people is porn causes erectile dysfunction. I imagine the research shows that's also not true.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Oh, God, no. There are plenty of studies showing that that's simply not true. Now, there's one case where porn can contribute to erection problems, which is that when men masturbate to porn and they come, they enter the refractory period and can't raise another erection for a little while.
Right.
And that period of time extends as men get older. So some men masturbate to porn, ejaculate, and then 2 hours later, they have their date and they can't get it up with the woman.
Right.
Well, not because they watched porn, but because they already came and they're still in their refractory period and can't get it up again. And so it's important for men to understand what the refractory period is and to gauge it as they age. Because, teenagers can get it up, 10 minutes after they come.
Right.
But get to be my age, 70, it's not like that anymore.
Right.
It takes quite a while to get to a position where you can raise another erection. And so men often blame pornography for their trouble when pornography has nothing to do with it. If they masturbated without pornography, the same thing would happen. It's all about the refractory period.
Is there anything about, though, the erotic template or what's arousing and we need something more and more intense versus real life partner that it makes it difficult to become aroused because of porn use?
The arousal is a big issue for women. Women often complain of problems with arousal. With men never complain about that. In fact, there's an old joke, what single word can women say to sexually arouse men? The answer is, hello. Men have arousal issues too.
Yes.
After middle age, after about age 50, men have more trouble getting aroused. And this comes as a total shock to most men because they spend their 20s with a perpetual hard-on in their pants.
Yeah, all they need is a breeze, right? And it's like, ready to go. Yeah.
Any woman says anything to them, they're primed and ready. Later in life, arousal becomes a real issue for men. And that is part of the reason why a lot of the porn audience is older men who are trying to convince themselves they can still become aroused. In my book, I talk about the fact that men can become sexually aroused at any age. It's just a question of how long it takes and how vivid your fantasies have to be.
Yeah.
And so I talk about, if older men want to use pornography to help them get aroused, it's fine. If older men want to think up vivid fantasies to help them get aroused, even if those fantasies do not involve their woman who they're in bed with, that's fine. Arousal remains possible into very late life. It just changes a little bit, and you have to roll with the punches and accommodate advanced years.
Yeah. So where can people find, what is your website? How do they get in touch? How do they find all these resources that you've got?
My Q&A website is greatsexguidance.com. And on there, I answer questions for free. And I also sell 135 e-articles, very low cost, money-back guarantee. So if you're unhappy, you can get your money back. And so that's the best place for people to find me. But Sizzling Sex for Life, that book is going to come out in early 2021. And it will be at fine booksellers everywhere.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to share all this.
Jessica, thank you. I really appreciate your having me on.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.